Taiwan is strongly condemning China for carrying out military exercises and launching missiles into the water around the island. China's drills came in retaliation to US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit earlier this week. And with that, let's head straight to the United States. And we're joined by Republican strategist John Jordan. John, the Chinese aren't happy?
Yeah, the Chinese are unhappy, and I think Nancy Pelosi did the right thing. And this is you see a lot of Republicans in Congress and the Senate rallying to Nancy Pelosi's defense, which is an unusual thing in American politics. What's really driving the Chinese crazy here isn't the substance of it, because American congressional delegations go to Taiwan all the time. This is the Speaker of the House did it, and this has everything to do with the upcoming Party Congress in October and November for President Xi. So President Xi has to look tough here, but he doesn't want to overdo it and trigger some sort of conflict, which right now is the last thing the Chinese economy needs.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because the Chinese need the US, need Europe, need other parts of the world, unlike many other nations. They need it virtually for their oxygen when it comes to the economy.
Yeah, China's a huge net importer of energy. They have massive trade routes across oceans they can't protect, the Indian Ocean, for example. And they're an export-driven economy. One of the point, their economy is actually teetering right now and is in a lot of trouble. 30% of it, their economy depends on the real estate market, which is in big trouble with Evergrande. They're sitting on a debt bomb. They're sitting on a demographic time bomb. And they have these rolling COVID shutdowns. So they're not meeting their economic targets, and people are unhappy. And this is, while not a democracy, the party bureaucracy in Beijing is conscious of public opinion and does value stability above all else. And that, more than anything else, is constraining Chinese actions in and around Taiwan, and at the same time kind of driving them to doing what they're doing, because they need to thread the needle between looking tough but not pushing it too far on the eve of this oh so important political event for President Xi.
It was a huge visit, wasn't it, for someone so high profile in the US? Nancy Pelosi is right up there.
Yes, it was. And you saw the Taiwanese reception to it as well. People lining the streets, skyscrapers being lit up. And inside of China, for example, you also saw on Weibo, which is their version of Twitter, it was almost a billion views of some of Nancy Pelosi's visit inside of China. And interestingly enough, you did not see the Chinese authority in Beijing really try to censor that. And that was really struck me, that you had such a huge following of this and no effort by the Chinese government to try to interfere with people seeing that. Maybe is it because it's just too big and they didn't want to be that overt and further stir the pot in a country that's dealing with economic slowdown and rolling lockdowns and massive discontent? Really interesting stuff, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
She's an extraordinary human being, regardless of which side you sit, whether you're on the Republican side or the Democratic side. Octogenarian, very strong, obviously grew up in politics, Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, she did. She's not the smartest. She's a cunning political operator. What's enabled her rise in the Democrat circles is she comes from a safe Democrat district where she never has to really run for re-election, which is very, very wealthy. And she's able to raise a ton of money and spread that around among Democrat politicians in Washington. So if you're the Democrat congressman from New York, one part of New York, or San Francisco or LA, you're going to be powerful because you don't have to spend money in running for re-election, and there's enormous pockets of Democrat money that you can control, spread around, and curry favor. It does not necessarily mean you're a brilliant political strategist. But she did grow up around politics. She actually grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and her dad was mayor of Baltimore before she ended up coming to the West Coast.
Yeah, exactly. So she's known politics for a long time, with her dad being the mayor. So what do you think about the saber rattling from China?
I think this is intended. I think it's very important for us to step back and understand the audience for whom this is intended. This is less intended. In the West, we tend to think, oh, this is being directed at us. While ostensibly it's directed at us, the real audience is the party bureaucracy and the Chinese public. They want to look like they are continuing with their pursuit of absorbing Taiwan, but they don't want to antagonize the West. And that's really who the audience is here. Taiwan, like Hong Kong, is a real problem for Beijing because they don't want to see a thriving Western-style democracy that's prosperous sitting 100 miles off their shore. That's an existential threat to the long-term primacy of the Chinese Communist Party, which is why Hong Kong had to be crushed and brought to heel, because they can't have these two systems existing side by side. Because throughout history, when you have freedom and market economics operating alongside socialist economy and repressive societies, eventually the people in the repressive society get sick of it and they see the difference, which is why the Chinese authority must see Taiwanese freedom and prosperity stamped out.
John, you're not only a Republican strategist, but you've got a very strong military and legal background. What do you think the impact of what we're seeing in the Ukraine is having in the Taiwan Straits?
Well, what we found out, right, this goes back a year since America's ignominious withdrawal from Afghanistan. The world is connected. You can't say this is happening over here and this is happening over here and they're not related, because they are. Ukraine would not have happened but for President Biden's abrupt withdrawal and abandonment of our friends and allies, both European and Afghan, in Afghanistan last summer. Putin never would have gone into Ukraine and thought it was safe to do so. At the same time, the outcome of the conflict in Ukraine is going to affect Beijing's calculus and whether or not they can eventually aspire to a forced entry assault into Taiwan, or at least the credible threat thereof, or threatening to blockade Taiwan, for example. Will they be able to stand Western wrath? Will they be able to withstand any military reprisals that may come their way? They're watching this very closely. Authoritarian regimes, whether it's in Tehran, Pyongyang, Beijing, are looking to see which way the free world is going to go, and will they pay a real price for long-held aggression? And I think that's why it's very important to see what happens in Ukraine, and certainly it's being watched around the world, and it's being watched in Beijing most closely.
Yeah, absolutely. And we mentioned it earlier in our discussion, and it's been a bit of a disaster, hasn't it, for Vladimir Putin in the Ukraine, of course, and it's just dragging on and on. But China need the rest of the world a lot more than Russia does.
Yeah, China is completely dependent on the rest of the world, and China can't afford to have their trade routes interrupted in some sort of air-sea battle over Taiwan, because it would be a simple matter for the Quad, India, Japan, the United States, Australia, and anybody else that decided to join the band, to sever China's energy import routes and trade routes to the rest of the world. That would crash the Chinese economy. So China is maybe at the peak of their power right now, and they're certainly being very aggressive in terms of building bases, which is certainly an issue potentially for Australia, which ought to be paid attention to, but in saber rattling in and around Taiwan, because again, when freedom and prosperity are alongside socialism and repression, that poses a long-term threat to those who rule by oppression along the socialist model. And that's why Taiwan is not an issue that's going to go away anytime soon.
Finally, domestically in the US, how's the economy, John?
The economy looks like we're entering a recession. We had a strong jobs report today, but that was kind of a mixed bag when you dig into the numbers. Inflation is still an issue. That 76% of American voters say that's the number one issue going into the midterms. The economy in the United States does appear to be slowing, and inflation doesn't seem to be arrested yet. So it looks like more likely than not, we will have a period of slow economic growth or recession, along with continued inflation, at least through the next 2-3 quarters.
John, it's always great to have a chat. Catch up with you soon.
My pleasure.